This process of coming face to face with your obstacles time and time again, this process is what I call up-leveling, all right? And so I have a company called Up-Level You. And really, what happens every time you up-level is you create a new normal. And you become someone with new standards. And you become someone with higher energy. And you become someone who can create more income and who has a deeper sense of her own internal power. And that becoming, that unfolding, is why we're having this discussion at all. It's why we're here at all. It's why we set goals at all. It's all about that becoming. So when I started this path, I was a musician, I was a songwriter, I was a touring performer, and I was a recording artist. And that becoming for me was a pretty intense process because not only did I have to, answer to the creative demands of that business, I also was navigating the entertainment industry, and I was building my own business. And like I said, I stopped waiting for discovery, and I started discovering myself, and so this was a lot of work. But eventually that work paid off, and I created, my own little mini empire. And my ego started to get very comfortable with everything that I'd created. And I remember very, very well one night, I was signing CDs after a show, and this woman came up to me and handed me her CDs. She wanted me to sign them. And her husband was standing next to her, and he said 6 words to me that hooked me for a very, very long time. He said to me, "Man, you're living the dream." And he high-fived me, and I high-fived him back, even though I never high-five anybody. But I was living the dream. I was being successful, being an artist. And for 90 minutes, night after night, every night, I made everyone believe that. And I believed it myself. And for a while, it was true. For a while, that was true. But that was my onstage world. Several years of doing that, what started to emerge backstage was an entirely different story. Now I know you think music, you think concerts, you think entertainment industry, and you think backstage, and we're all sort of like, ooh, hookers and cocaine, right? But this was the folk world. This was folk music, so it's more like Pinot and kale chips, But my backstage looked even more different than that. Because what started to happen was that after my shows finished and after I was signing CDs, invariably there were 4 or 5 people waiting to talk to me. They were waiting till the line died down, and they had questions for me. And they wanted to ask me things like, how do I follow my dreams? How do I be more authentic? How do I build a business doing what I love? And I would just say to them, oh, come backstage. Let's talk about this there. And I'd be packing up, and I'd be coaching them. And I'd be like, okay, step 1, you gotta do this, gotta do this, gotta do this. I didn't call it coaching, but that's what I was doing. And night after night, slowly, this started to build. And it wasn't like anyone was telling anyone about this. I wasn't on stage going, and I'll coach you backstage. It wasn't that. This just started to evolve. It started to just happen, and I loved it. And I was embarrassed at how much I loved it. I was secretly really embarrassed at how much I loved it. And I remember one night when my backstage kind of collided with my front stage. It was after a show. It was after my little coaching circle had disbanded. And the sound engineer and the promoter of the show and the club owner and 2 other guys from the club, they were all walking me to my car. And we were walking down the street together. They were carrying my guitars. They were carrying my pedals. I didn't have anything in my hands. We're all being very hip, black T-shirts, jeans, talking music, talking art. I was being very cool. Got about 25 feet from my SUV, and I suddenly remembered something disastrous. The entire front seat of my car was littered with personal growth audiobooks. And business growth audiobooks and spiritual growth audiobooks. I think I had the entire Sounds True library in my front seat. I think Tammy Simon was just sitting there waiting for me. I don't even know what we were talking about, but I just took off running. I just started sprinting, and I flew. I got about 5 feet from the car. I had the key fob in the hand. I opened the door. I pulled the door open. I'm shoving Cheryl Richardson under the seat, Carolyn Mace into the glove box, Thich Nhat Hanh in the back, Jack Canfield under the front seat. And I'm grabbing T-shirts out of the back and covering all the evidence, because God forbid the cool kids discover that I'm into all this consciousness stuff and I'm into all this growth stuff. And that night was a really big shift for me, because I realized that my backstage had started to creep into my front stage, which is why the very first lesson of being the CEO of YOU is that you got to check backstage. Because your backstage is where your life is always talking out loud to you. And it's weird, after that little audiobook escapade that night, this very strange phenomenon started to happen where my wise self started to show up each night at my performances. And she started to join me on stage at my performances. And one thing you got to know about my wise self is that she's not like floaty or glowy or angel-like in any way, shape, or form. My wise self is kind of the central casting, quintessential therapist woman. And she would come wandering out, wearing her Eileen Fisher, very drapey scarves, looking very elegant during my shows, and she would sit down while I was performing, and she would watch me. And then she would say, "So Christine, this moment right here, this right here that you're doing, how are you doing with this? How are you feeling?" And I'd be on stage and I'd be going, "I'm good, this is great, this is what I do, this is what I created, I'm on it." And then she would say, "Okay, be that as it may, I happen to notice that backstage, when you're coaching people, you truly light up. Your energy changes. And I'm wondering if it's possible that you may be avoiding what could be the next calling in your life." And I would say, "I'm not avoiding anything. Not avoiding anything, totally transparent, completely aware of what I'm all about." And she would say, "Well, I only ask because I noticed that last night you stuffed Deepak Chopra into your glove box so hard you broke his head." And that's how our conversations with my wise self went night after night. Which ultimately, finally made me realize the truth of all of this, and that is, your backstage never lies. Your backstage absolutely never lies. What? Okay, yes. Your backstage is where you find yourself drawn to certain clients. It's where you may find yourself drawn to certain kinds of events that you're going to. It's where you find yourself loving this new way that you're teaching or this new way that you're working, that for whatever reason, your front stage has not yet fully entertained or embraced yet. But eventually, you will notice, as I did, that your backstage starts to speak much louder than your front stage. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you want to hear it, right? Because I didn't. I had built this for 12 years. You know, I'd built this huge thing for 12 years. I was living the dream. And so I spent the better part of the next year resisting my Backstage messages. And resistance is a little different from waiting, isn't it? Because we only resist one thing. We resist change. Which is why the second lesson is all about courage. Because resistance takes on many, many different voices, doesn't it?